Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're finally checking out the Gaming X version of the Radeon RX 5700 XT. Actually, it was MSI who sent us the first AIB graphics card for review with their Evoke OC, but if I'm honest, this little graphics card did leave us wanting more. Personally, I didn't really like the look of the card, but for me the biggest issue was the lackluster thermal performance. It was barely an improvement over the AMD reference design, only slightly reducing the operating temperature and volume. The Gaming X version, on the other hand, promises to be one of the best 5700 XTs on the market, and I can tell you, it is without question one of the heaviest we've seen so far. In fact, it's heavier than even PowerColor's Red Devil. But first, let's talk about the design, because the 5700 XT Gaming X looks nothing like previous Gaming X models. The sort of angular cutout, aggressive-looking fan shroud has been replaced with a sleeker, smoother, more refined version featuring some nice brushed aluminium highlights. Personally, I think it looks great, though I can't help but notice MSI's made the same old mistake they always seem to make with these Gaming X models, the red highlights. Now don't get me wrong, they do look quite good and all that, but unless you want to incorporate red into your build, it might not be the look you're after. Perhaps a more neutral silver or white highlight would have worked better here, at least in my opinion. Anyway, it's not a big deal, and hopefully most of you don't care too much about how the card looks and you're more focused on the performance. And speaking of performance, I was surprised to find just two of MSI's 95mm Torx 3.0 fans. Typically the Gaming X models that cost $400 or more have a trio of fans, but for this one we just have two. That said, this configuration probably does work best with two fans given the heatsink design. But before I get to that, on the back side of the card you'll find a full-size aluminium backplate in a silvery grey colour, and MSI has taken advantage of this large backplate to use it more as a heat spreader, connecting it to the PCB behind the GPU and GDDR6 memory using a number of large thermal pads. There's no RGB lighting or cutouts here, just a clean aluminium backplate. Still on the side of the card you will find an RGB zone which features the MSI Gaming branding. It looks okay, and you can apply a number of different lighting effects here or just turn it off entirely. Then at the opposite end of the card you'll find a pair of 8-pin PCIe power connectors, which is a standard configuration for a 5700 XT. In total, the card measures 297mm long, 140mm tall, 58mm wide, and tips the scales at a whopping 1410 grams. And that makes it 12% heavier than the Red Devil. It's also just 7% lighter than the truly massive MSI RTX 2070 Super Gaming X graphics card. Finally, around at the I/O panel we find a pretty standard configuration, 3 display ports along with a single HDMI output. Okay, I think it's time to pull the cooler off for a better look at the metal as well as the PCB. Let's start with the massive heatsink. This thing weighs 780 grams, and that's with the fans and shroud removed. To put that into context, the Evoke OC packed a 355 gram cooler, so you're getting more than twice the metal with the Gaming X. As another example, the Sapphire Nitro Plus, that featured a total of 483 grams of metal, while the PowerColor Red Devil had 694 grams. The Gaming X also has an additional 64 gram GDDR6 heat spreader, taking the total weight to 844 grams. That makes it 22% heavier than the Red Devil, which is now the second heaviest 5700 XT we've come across. And this big cooler also looks to be very good in terms of quality. The GPU gets a large nickel-plated copper base plate that connects to half a dozen nickel-plated copper heat pipes. And here we find 5 6mm pipes with one 8mm pipe. Then the second fin array connects to an aluminium base plate which covers all the power delivery components. So we're expecting pretty good VRM thermal performance with this one. Then we also have that black heat spreader that covers the GDDR6 memory, and it makes contact with the primary heatsink using a few small thermal pads. Now, as was the case with the Evoke, 2 of the GDDR6 memory chips are only partially covered. I know this was a big drama with the Evoke, but it really was a bit of a non-issue, as completely covering the chips reduced temperatures by a degree. The real issue with the Evoke was the undersized heatsink that required the fans to spin much faster than we would have liked to avoid the GPU throttling. Still, MSI would have been better off with a large base plate design here, similar to Sapphire's for the Nitro Plus, which saw the GDDR6 memory get its own small heatsink. At the end of the day, you can't overclock the GDDR6 memory anyway, so as long as it runs cooler than the 86 degrees of the reference card, it won't be an issue. Over on the PCB, we find an upgraded 9-phase VRM for the GPU with an additional 2 phases for the GDDR6 memory. The GPU VRM is controlled by an international rectifier IR35217, while the memory portion of the VRM is supported by an NCP 81022 controller. As usual for these graphics card reviews, I started by firing up F1 2019 and ran it on a loop for an hour. This saw the Gaming X peak at just 67 degrees in a 21 degree room inside the Corsair Crystal 570X, fully populated with 120mm fans. And as usual, I'll compare this result with the other 5700 XTs we've tested so far a bit later on in the video. Now, to maintain this temperature, the fans spun at between just 1200 and 1300 RPM, making the Gaming X extremely quiet. In fact, under full load, the card really is silent, or at least as silent as a graphics card gets with active fans. And again, I'll compare the operating volume with other cards tested so far in a moment. As for the GDDR6 temperature, we saw the memory peak at just 76 degrees, which is the same temperature we've seen from almost all the 5700 XT graphics cards that we've tested. Now, for overclocking, with the limits reached, we saw a peak operating temperature of just 68 degrees, and incredibly, this saw the fans spinning at just 1400 RPM. And this meant the card was still very quiet, and one of the best performers we've seen so far, if not the best performer. But as usual, we found that although we're targeting 2150 MHz, the card maintained a core clock speed of around 2 GHz, so that's a mere 8% increase in frequency from stock. Okay, so let's move into the benchmark graphs. As usual, we're testing with our Core i9 1900K GPU test rig. The CPU has been overclocked to 5 GHz and we have 16 GB of DDR4 3400 memory. The latest drivers available at the time of testing have been used, and for this one we have just a few select games to look at because there's really no point benchmarking more than a couple of games. First up, we have Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and here the Gaming X delivered the same 72 FPS regardless of whether it was overclocked or not. That made it a whole 1 FPS faster than the Red Devil out of the box, but on par with the Red Devil once the Red Devil's overclocked. So once again, we find these higher end 5700 XTs are pretty well maxed out from factory. Much the same as seen when testing with Forza Horizon 4, we get an extra frame on average from the custom overclock, and the Gaming X is no faster than any other AIB 5700 XT that we've tested so far. Shadow of the Tomb Raider shows a small 4% performance gain from the overclock, but again the Gaming X performs basically identical to the other 5700 XTs that we've tested already. Interestingly, in terms of power usage, the Gaming X was very efficient relative to other models such as the THIC 2 and Nitro Plus. Basically, it matched the Evoke OC and Red Devil. That said, when it came to total system draw, they're all much the same. We're looking at just a 4-watt discrepancy. Moving on to the GPU temperature comparison, and here we see just how good the MSI Gaming X really is, peaking at just 67 degrees with a fan speed of 1300 RPM makes it the best performing 5700 XT that we've seen to date. When compared to the Red Devil, the fan speed was dropped by 100 RPM and the temperature by 3 degrees. That is a super impressive result. And if you weren't impressed by the GPU thermal result, then how about a 62 degree VRM temperature? That makes the Gaming X 5 degrees cooler than the Nitro Plus, 6 degrees cooler than the THIC 2, and 8 degrees cooler than the Red Devil. Sadly, the GDDR6 temperature wasn't quite as impressive. It's the Nitro Plus that takes the crown here, peaking at just 72 degrees. Still, the Gaming X was hardly weak here, peaking at 76 degrees, which, as I said earlier, is pretty much the same memory temperature that we've seen from all the other custom 5700 XT graphics cards that we've tested so far. As for the operating volume, the Gaming X and its 2 slow spinning fans, they're extremely quiet, operating at just 40 decibels, making it 3 decibels quieter than Nitro Plus and 5 decibels quieter than the Red Devil. It was also quieter than the Red Devil once overclocked, so another stellar result for MSI. Who would have thought, after the disappointment that was the Evoke OC, that MSI would come and just smash it out of the park with the Gaming X model? This really is the best 5700 XT graphics card that I've tested yet. It's cooler and quieter than Nitro Plus, and the only exception here being the memory temperatures, but they're well below that of the AMD reference model and won't be an issue as you can't overclock the GDDR6 memory anyway. Although MSI could have certainly improved the design for the memory cooling, it really is a non-issue, as I said. The card's also very thick, but not unnecessarily so, given the massive heatsink, and although it is very heavy, I don't see GPU sag being an issue, given how well the card is constructed. So I have absolutely no issue recommending the MSI RX 5700 XT Gaming X graphics card, with one exception, and that is, how much will it cost? It's pretty hard to justify spending more than, say, $450 to $460 on a 5700 XT. In fact, anything more than $460, and you're certainly better off with an RTX 2070 Super. The Red Devil can be had for $440, which is a good price for that model, whereas the Nitro Plus will set you back $470, so at that price I'd skip the Sapphire option and just go with Power Color. The Thick 2 is $450, and it's simply not worth that asking price. It's a $420 card, I'd say, so if MSI can deliver the Gaming X for $440, it'll be my go-to model. I'm expecting it to be more like $450 though, so if that is the case, it'll end up being a toss-up, in my opinion, between the Red Devil and the Gaming X. But of course, we'll just have to wait and see what it does end up going on sale for. So I'll probably pin a comment below when we have that information and give you my thoughts on the retail price. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, do the like thing, much appreciated. You can also subscribe for more content just like this, and I suppose other tech related content. We do things other than just graphics cards. And yeah, you can subscribe to our Patreon account because that gives you access to our monthly live stream, Discord chat, all that good stuff. Anyway, I'm just going to wrap this up. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.